Hello and welcome to Trojan Talk. I'm your host, Aaron Taylor. With me today is Dr. Scott Nokes, here to talk about, even though you're an English professor, we're going to be talking a little nerd fun here. So thanks for joining me here today. So
thanks for having me.
And we're talking Dragon Con. It's a big convention, fantasy comic convention in Atlanta, and Labor Day weekend, but it's in something that you have, even though you're an English professor, have been involved with for many years on a lot of different types of subjects.
Yeah. So I first went to Dragon Con, some years ago. I'm going to say 15 years ago, but I reserve the right to say that's wrong. Just to go to the con and just to see it. And I guess the second year I went there, I saw a session and I went to, and it turned out it was the first year of the Comics and Popular Arts Conference, which is an academic conference that's kind of piggybacks on Dragon Con. So basically what they do, what we do now, because after that first year I said, how can I get involved? And I got involved, and now I'm one of the two senior members of it, is we set up an academic conference that deals with the kinds of things that they do at Dragon Con. So we get experts who want to talk about, science fiction literature, or video games and psychology, or horror films, or cosplay, or whatever the topic is, and we put together essentially academic panels, and these are legit academic panels. We occasionally will have the independent scholar in there, not many, that will allow in, and then we ask the tracks. Dragon Con's divided into different tracks if they want to host the panel, and then they present what's really academic information in a way that is accessible to
the masses.
Yeah, to the masses, right. And so I started doing that just as a presenter probably the next year, and then became an organizer pretty quick. So, some years I'm talking about, Norse mythology in Stargate. This year I'm probably going to talk about Korean zombie movies. Sometimes I talk about literary things, and sometimes I talk about other kind of cultural things. But it depends what they need.
That's one of the things. A lot of people, the quote-unquote comic book convention is not somewhere you would think there would be academic study and room for that to kind of slide in there. But then again, most of the folks that go to there are kind of on the academic side anyways.
Yeah. Well, there is too. Like, it's one of the things I will often say to. It used to be like 15 years ago, we had to kind of sell this to academics. Yeah. I think now people are getting the sense of that public outreach is really important, and so because of that, it's important. If I'm going to talk about my work to a public audience, I guess I can talk about it to anyone, but it's first better to talk about people who are interested, and second, better to talk about people who are interested and already have some baseline knowledge. So if, for example, I want to talk about like Norse mythology in the Stargate series, and I go to a panel that's where everyone's a huge Stargate fan, not only are they interested in the subject, but they know every reference. I don't have to tell. They know every reference to Stargate. They almost always know more than I do about the specifics of that fandom.
So do you end up learning sometimes
all
from them?
All the time.
And even though you are an English professor, this time you're talking about translation in streaming services, right? So,
right.
Which I guess kind of plays into it. But how does that come about? How do those two come together?
Well, so in this case, we're looking for people who had a sense of translation theory, that when you're translating something, it's not just a one-for-one. And part of that, which when you're studying translation theory, you learn pretty quickly. Anyone who knows a foreign language knows that often there's a cultural element that doesn't quite fit. So, when you take your high school Spanish class, they're also teaching you cultural things, because translating this word exactly doesn't always make sense. And so what I'm going to be talking about is how now suddenly in the streaming services, we have all these international shows, a lot in anime, manga, but there's a lot of other live action ones that are available. And the way in which American audiences can either misunderstand them or understand them differently. So let me give you an example, which we may talk about there. This actually has nothing to do with literal translation in the sense of one language to another, but the show Doctor Who, which is in English, right? One of the first exports to really become popular also in America. Very big fandom in DragonCon. In the show Doctor Who, sometimes the characters will talk about how, oh, the English don't like us, or the English don't care about us. And and the American audience will think, well, you're English, right? Well, they're Welsh. To Americans, they're all English, and so there's something about a kind of cultural or political divide that
something simple like that people may not understand. Well, it all sounds interesting, and I know if anybody wants to head to Atlanta on Labor Day weekend, they get a chance to maybe hear some of this, and it's exciting to hear about how the academics translate into this convention world. Scott, I want to thank you for joining me here today. So
thanks for having me.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us on today's edition of Trojan Talk.